It's not like you ever travel anyway, Holly. Stop being so dramatic about this whole situation right now. My mother's laughter echoed through the phone, sharp and dismissive, cutting through me like it had for 33 years of my life. I sat in my small apartment in Des Moines, staring at the credit card statement that had just arrived in my email inbox. $12,700. A luxury Caribbean cruise for my sister Brittany, charged to my account without a single word of warning or permission from anyone in my family. My name is Holly, and I had spent my entire adult life being the responsible one in my family. The one who worked 2 jobs through college while my younger sister Brittany got her tuition paid in full by our parents. The one who saved every penny, while my parents praised Brittany for her expensive taste and sophisticated lifestyle choices. The one who bought a house at 29, only to let my parents move in rent-free when my father claimed his retirement savings had been completely wiped out by bad investments he had made. "Mom, you used my credit card without asking me first," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and calm. "That's $12,000 I don't have sitting around in my bank account right now." "Oh, please," she scoffed loudly into the phone. "You make good money at that accounting firm of yours. And Brittany deserved this trip after everything she's been through with her divorce recently. Besides, we're your parents. What's yours is ours. Isn't that how family is supposed to work together?" I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of exhaustion settle over me heavily. Everything Brittany went through with her divorce. Her divorce from a man she had cheated on repeatedly throughout their marriage. Her inability to hold a job for more than 6 months at any given time. Her constant need for financial rescuing that somehow always fell squarely on my shoulders alone to handle. "When were you planning to tell me about this charge on my card?" I asked her. "We're telling you now, aren't we? The cruise leaves in 3 days from the port. Brittany is so excited about it already. Your father and I are going too, of course. Someone needs to keep her company on the trip, and we thought it would be a nice family vacation for all of us to enjoy together. A family vacation. One that I was paying for entirely, but wasn't even invited to join them on. You're all going on this cruise? On my credit card without asking?" "Holly, don't start with that tone of yours right now. You know your father's back has been bothering him terribly lately, and we never get to do anything nice together as a family. You should be happy for us instead of complaining about money. Besides, you're always too busy with work to travel anywhere anyway. The points will be good for your credit score or whatever it is you care so much about." That was when something inside me shifted permanently and completely. It wasn't anger, not exactly what I was feeling. It was something colder, more calculated than simple rage or frustration. A clarity that had been building for years finally crystallizing into something I could hold on to tightly and use. "You're right, Mom," I said, my voice suddenly calm and perfectly steady. "I hope you all have a wonderful time on the cruise together. Enjoy the trip." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. My mother wasn't used to me giving in so easily without putting up a fight first. Usually, there would be an argument between us, followed by guilt-tripping from her, followed by my eventual capitulation and apology for making such a fuss about nothing important. "Well, that's more like it," she said, though I could hear the confusion evident in her voice. "I knew you'd understand once you thought about it rationally like a good daughter should. Family has to support each other through everything that happens." "Absolutely," I agreed pleasantly with her. "Family has to support each other through everything." After I hung up the phone, I sat in complete silence for a very long time in my apartment. The apartment I was renting was small and modest, a 1-bedroom unit that I had moved into after letting my parents take over my house entirely for themselves. My house. The one I had saved for years to afford on my own. The one I had planned to start my own family in someday in the future. The one my parents had been living in rent-free for 4 years while I paid the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, and all the utilities from a cramped apartment across town from them. They had promised it would only be temporary when they first moved in with me. 6 months, maybe a year at most, until my father got back on his feet financially after his losses. But the months had turned into years slowly, and every time I brought up the subject of them finding their own place to live, my mother would remind me of everything they had sacrificed to raise me properly as a child. My father would clutch his back dramatically and talk about how hard it was to move at his age now. And I would feel guilty enough to let it go for another few months longer. But this situation was completely different from anything before it. This wasn't asking me to cover an unexpected bill or help with groceries during a tight month for them. This was taking $12,700 without permission and laughing about it openly to my face. This was booking a luxury vacation for themselves and my sister, while treating my money like it was theirs to spend however they pleased without consequence. No, not this time. For the first time in my entire life, I was going to stop being the family doormat for everyone. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years at my job. I needed time to think carefully about everything, to plan properly for what was ahead, to make absolutely sure I was really prepared to do what I was seriously considering doing. I made myself a cup of strong coffee and sat at my small kitchen table, letting the memories wash over me like a tide I had been holding back for decades of my life. Growing up, I had always known I was the less favored child in our family dynamic. Brittany was 2 years younger than me, blonde and beautiful where I was plain and practical in appearance. She had my mother's natural charm and my father's striking blue eyes, while I had inherited my grandmother's sturdy build and unremarkable brown hair. From the time Brittany learned to walk as a toddler, she had been the center of attention in our household constantly. I remembered the year I made the honor roll for the first time in elementary school clearly. I had rushed home with my report card clutched in my hands, expecting praise and celebration from my parents for my achievement. Instead, I found my parents cooing over Brittany's participation trophy from a dance recital she had been in. "That's nice, Holly," my mother had said without even looking at my grades on the card. "Put it on the fridge if you want to display it." I remembered saving my allowance for months to buy my first bicycle on my own, only to have it given to Brittany when she threw a tantrum about wanting one too for herself. "You're the older sister," my father had explained patiently to me. "You need to set a good example of sharing with your younger sibling always." I remembered working 30 hours a week during high school to save money for college while Brittany went on shopping sprees with the credit card my parents gave her for emergencies only. I remembered graduating with honors and a mountain of student debt while my parents took out loans to send Brittany to a private university because she said the state school wasn't good enough for someone like her to attend. And I remembered the day, 4 years ago now, when my father had called me crying about how they had lost everything they had saved for retirement. The investment scheme that turned out to be completely fraudulent. The completely depleted savings account that resulted. The threat of foreclosure on their family house they were facing. I had just closed on my own home at that time. A modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood that represented years of sacrifice and careful financial planning on my part. Without hesitation at all, I had offered to let them stay with me until they got back on their feet again. "Just for a little while," my mother had said, already directing the movers where to put her furniture in my house. "We'll be out of your hair before you know it at all." But they never left my house after that, and slowly over time, my home became their home instead of mine. My furniture was moved to the garage to make room for theirs to be displayed. My decorations were replaced with family photos that mysteriously featured far more pictures of Brittany than of me in them. My spare bedroom became my father's man cave for himself, and my home office became my mother's craft room for her projects. When I started dating someone seriously for the first time in years, my mother had made it abundantly clear that bringing him to the house would be inappropriate behavior. "We're your parents, Holly. We shouldn't have to deal with your romantic entanglements under our roof where we live." So I found a small apartment nearby and let them have the house completely to themselves, still paying every single bill while they contributed absolutely nothing at all. The relationship hadn't lasted very long after that. My boyfriend couldn't understand why I let my family walk all over me constantly like that, and I couldn't explain it in a way that made sense even to myself at the time. It was just how things had always been in our family dynamic. Holly sacrifices everything for others. Holly provides for everyone else. Holly asks for nothing and expects even less in return from anyone. But now, sitting in my cramped apartment and staring at a $12,700 charge on my credit card statement, I finally understood what I had been refusing to see clearly all along. My family didn't love me as a person at all. They loved what I could do for them instead. They loved my reliability, my guilt, my endless willingness to put their needs before my own well-being always. But me, as a person with my own needs, I was invisible to them except when they needed something from me. I thought about calling my best friend Fiona to talk through my complicated feelings about everything. But I already knew what she would say to me. Fiona had been telling me for years that my family was toxic to me, that I needed to establish firm boundaries with them, that I was worth more than the way they constantly treated me. I had always made excuses for my parents, found ways to justify their behavior toward me, convinced myself that things would change if I just tried a little harder to please them. Well, I was done trying to please them now. I was done being the family ATM machine for everyone. I was done pretending that this was what love looked like in a family. I picked up my phone and called the real estate agent I had found online last night. Her name was Denise, and she answered on the second ring promptly. "I have a house I need to sell quickly," I told her directly. "It's currently occupied by tenants, but I'm the sole owner on the deed legally. How quickly can we make this sale happen?" The walkthrough of the house happened 2 days later, while my parents and Brittany were busy packing for their cruise excitedly. I told them I was stopping by to check on the water heater, which had been making strange noises according to my mother's last complaint to me. They barely acknowledged my presence at all as I walked through the house with Denise, pointing out features and noting the condition of various rooms carefully. It was surreal, seeing my home through the eyes of a real estate professional like that. The house was in excellent condition overall, thanks to the maintenance I had continued to pay for even after moving out of it. My parents had kept it reasonably clean. I had to give them that much credit at least. They may have taken over my space completely, but at least they hadn't let it fall into disrepair. "This is a beautiful property," Denise said as we stood in the backyard together surveying everything. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, updated kitchen, finished basement. In this current market, we could list it for significantly more than what you paid 4 years ago. You've got a lot of equity built up here. Equity that my parents had benefited from while I scraped by in a rental apartment across town. Equity that they assumed they would inherit someday eventually, probably expecting me to leave it to Brittany since she needed it more than I ever did in their minds. "List it for sale," I said firmly without any hesitation. "Whatever price you think is fair for the market. I want it sold before my tenants return from their vacation trip." Denise nodded in agreement with my timeline. "I'll have the listing up by tomorrow morning at the latest. And I have a few investors I work with regularly who might be interested in a quick cash purchase of this property. No guarantees on that, but I'll make some calls today." True to her word, Denise had the house listed within 24 hours of our meeting. By then, my parents and Brittany were already on their way to the port excitedly, sending me pictures of their excitement, and not a single word of thanks for funding their entire adventure. My mother texted me a photo of their cabin on the ship, spacious and luxurious with a private balcony overlooking the ocean beautifully. "Wish you were here with us," she wrote, followed by a string of laughing emojis that made her insincerity perfectly clear to me immediately. I didn't respond to her message at all. Instead, I watched my phone carefully as inquiries about the house started coming in steadily throughout the day. Denise had been absolutely right about the current market conditions. Within 3 days of listing, we had multiple competitive offers, including 2 cash buyers who could close within a week's time. I accepted the highest offer on the house, a cash purchase from a young couple who had just gotten married recently and were eager to start their new life together. Their names were Jonathan and Claire. They seemed genuinely excited about the house when they viewed it, talking about the nursery they wanted to set up in the spare bedroom and the garden they planned to plant in the backyard together. It felt right. Somehow. Knowing that my home would go to people who would actually appreciate it properly and take care of it. The closing was scheduled for the day before my parents were supposed to return from the cruise. I signed all the papers with a steady hand, transferring ownership of the property I had worked so hard to afford on my own. The proceeds were deposited into my bank account, minus the real estate fees and the remaining balance on my mortgage. When everything was finally settled, I had a substantial sum left over, more than enough to pay off the credit card charge completely and start fresh somewhere new. But first, I had one more important thing to take care of. I called my credit card company and reported the charges as fraudulent activity. When they asked for details about the situation, I explained that someone had used my card without authorization to book a cruise vacation. They opened an investigation immediately and issued me a temporary credit while they looked into the matter further. My mother's name was on the booking, of course, which would make the investigation fairly straightforward for them to resolve. Then I went online and booked myself a cruise of my own to enjoy. Not the same one my family was on, but a different cruise line entirely. A different destination altogether. A solo adventure to Alaska, departing the day after my parents were scheduled to return home. I used the points and cashback that had accumulated on my credit card from their unauthorized purchase, which felt like a particularly fitting piece of poetic justice to me. For the first time in many years, I felt something that might have been hope rising inside me. I was finally choosing myself over everyone else. I was finally stepping out of the role that my family had assigned me and claiming my own story for myself. It wasn't about revenge, not really what motivated me. It was about survival. It was about recognizing that I deserved better than what I had been accepting all my life from them. The new owners would take possession of the house the night before my parents returned from their cruise. I had already arranged for my personal belongings to be removed from the property completely, not that there was much left there anyway. My parents would come back from their stolen vacation to find complete strangers living in what they had come to think of as their home. And I would be gone by then. Sailing toward a new life for myself, surrounded by glaciers and wildlife, and the kind of peace that comes from finally closing a door that should have been shut years ago. As I packed my suitcase for my trip, I thought about the phone calls that would inevitably come soon. The accusations, the tears, the guilt trips that my mother had perfected over 3 decades of practice on me. But for the first time ever, I felt no anxiety about facing them. I felt nothing but relief, because this time, I wasn't going to answer their calls at all. This time, I was going to let the calls pile up while I watched the northern lights from the deck of a cruise ship. This time, I was going to prioritize my own happiness over their expectations of me completely. My phone buzzed with a text from Brittany. "Having the best time ever on this cruise. Thanks for making this possible, sis." I stared at the message for a long moment silently, then put my phone face down on the table. They had no idea what was coming for them soon. And honestly, even if they had known ahead of time, I doubted they would have changed a single thing about their behavior toward me. Some people never learn until consequences force them to face reality. And my family was about to get one hell of a lesson about that. The day the new owners moved into the house was a Thursday. I knew this because I had been tracking my family's cruise itinerary obsessively, counting down the days until their return like a prisoner marking time until release from captivity. Their ship was scheduled to dock on Friday morning at the port, which meant they would probably be home by early afternoon that day. The timing was absolutely perfect for my plan. I met Jonathan and Claire, the young couple who had purchased my house, at a coffee shop near the property that Thursday morning. They were in their late 20s, practically glowing with newlywed joy and excitement about their first home together as a married couple. Jonathan worked as an engineer at a manufacturing plant outside the city limits, and Claire was a nurse at the university hospital downtown. They seemed like genuinely good people, the kind of people who would take care of the house properly and build a happy life within its walls together. "We can't thank you enough for the quick closing on this sale," Claire said warmly, her eyes bright with gratitude toward me. "We've been living with Jonathan's parents for months now, saving up for a down payment on our own place. We never expected to find something this perfect so fast. The house has good energy to it," I told them sincerely. And I meant every word of it. Despite everything my family had put me through there over the years, the house itself had never been the problem. It deserved a fresh start as much as I did myself. I handed over the keys to them and wished them well in their new home, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and liberation as I watched them drive away to begin their new chapter together. That house had represented so much of my hard work over the years, so many of my dreams for the future. But those dreams had been corrupted by my family's presence there, twisted into something unrecognizable from what I had wanted. Now, at least, the house would serve its true purpose again. It would be a home for people who genuinely loved each other, not a symbol of my endless exploitation by my own family. That evening, I finished packing for my cruise trip. My flight to Seattle departed the following morning early, and the ship would leave port Saturday afternoon. I had booked a balcony cabin for myself, splurging on an upgrade that I never would have considered before in my life. But this trip was about more than just getting away from my family temporarily. It was about proving to myself that I was worth the investment of money and time. I went to bed early that night, setting my alarm for 5 a.m. As I lay in the darkness of my apartment alone, I tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring for everyone. My parents arriving home from the cruise, exhausted from their trip, probably complaining about the long flight back and the terrible airport food. My father searching for his house key in his pocket, while my mother supervised the luggage impatiently. The confusion when the key didn't work in the lock anymore. The growing panic as they realized something was terribly wrong with the situation. I should have felt guilty about all of this. A good daughter would feel guilty about putting her elderly parents through such a terrible shock like this. But I didn't feel guilty at all about it. I felt completely free. My phone buzzed on the nightstand beside me. A text from my mother, sent despite the international roaming charges I was undoubtedly paying for on her behalf. Last night on the ship tonight, Brittany is crying because she doesn't want to leave yet. This has been the best vacation of our entire lives. You really should have come with us, Holly. I read the message 3 times over, marveling at the complete lack of self-awareness in it. They had stolen $12,000 from me, taken a vacation I wasn't even invited to join, and my mother still thought she could guilt me about not joining them on it. It would have been funny if it wasn't so deeply pathetic and sad. I didn't respond to her message at all. Instead, I turned off my phone completely and closed my eyes, letting sleep carry me away from the complicated emotions that threatened to overwhelm me entirely. Tomorrow would be a new day. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the rest of my life. The alarm woke me at 5 a.m, and I was at the airport by 7. My flight to Seattle was uneventful and smooth, and I arrived at the cruise terminal with hours to spare before boarding. The ship was massive and impressive, gleaming white against the gray Pacific sky above, and I felt a flutter of excitement as I walked up the gangway to begin my adventure finally. My cabin was even nicer than I had expected it to be. The balcony faced the open ocean directly, and the bed was covered in crisp white linens that looked more inviting than anything I had slept on in years. I unpacked my clothes into the closet, arranged my toiletries in the bathroom neatly, and then stepped out onto the balcony to breathe in the salt air deeply and fully. This was really happening now. I was really doing this for myself. I was on a cruise ship, sailing toward Alaska, while my family returned home to discover that the life they had taken for granted was no longer waiting for them there. My phone had been off since the night before, and I had no intention of turning it back on until I was ready to face reality. But as the ship began to pull away from the dock slowly, curiosity got the better of me finally. I powered on the device and watched as the notifications flooded in rapidly. 29 missed calls, 15 voicemails waiting, 47 text messages, all from my parents and Brittany, with a few from numbers I didn't recognize. The first voicemail was from my mother, left around 2 p.m. Holly, something very strange is happening here. There are people in the house. They say they own it now legally. This must be some kind of terrible mistake. Call me back immediately right now. The second was from my father, an hour later than hers. Holly, this isn't funny at all. The police came to the house. They said we have to leave the property immediately. Where are we supposed to go now? Call us back right now. The third was from Brittany, her voice high and panicked. Holly, what did you do to us? Mom and Dad are freaking out completely about this. You can't just sell the house without telling them first about it. This is completely insane. Call me right now. I listened to a few more of them, watching the timeline of their growing desperation unfold before me. Confusion had given way to panic first, then to anger, then to something that almost sounded like genuine fear. By the 10th message, my mother was crying openly, demanding to know how I could possibly do this to my own family who raised me. But here's the thing about manipulation. It only works if the target still cares about the manipulator's approval of them. And after 33 years of being taken for granted, dismissed, and exploited, I had finally stopped caring about what they thought of me. I deleted all the voicemails without listening to the rest of them. Then I turned my phone off again completely and went to dinner alone. The dining room on the cruise ship was absolutely spectacular to see. All gleaming chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the endless expanse of ocean outside. I was seated at a table for one person, which might have been lonely under different circumstances than these. But tonight, surrounded by the gentle hum of conversation and the clink of fine china around me, I felt nothing but peace. I ordered the salmon for my meal, paired with a glass of white wine that probably cost more than I would normally spend on a week's worth of groceries at home. But I was done denying myself the simple pleasures that everyone else seemed to take for granted easily. I was done being the person who never traveled anywhere, never splurged on herself, never lived her life fully. As I ate my dinner, I thought about my family and what they might be doing right now at this moment. It was late evening in Des Moines already, and they had been effectively homeless for about 8 hours now. Where had they gone for shelter? To a hotel, probably, though my mother would hate the expense of it greatly. Maybe they had called one of their friends, begging for a spare room until they could figure out what to do next about their situation. Part of me wondered if I should feel bad about the chaos I had caused them. They were my parents, after all, the people who raised me. I had grown up in their house, eaten their food, worn the clothes they provided for me. Didn't I owe them something for all of that, at least? But then I remembered the $12,700 on my credit card they stole. I remembered the years of paying their bills while they contributed nothing at all. I remembered every Christmas when Brittany's gifts were piled high while mine were an afterthought. I remembered every accomplishment of mine that was ignored completely, every sacrifice that was taken for granted, every moment when I was made to feel like I didn't matter to anyone. No, I didn't owe them anything anymore at all. I had paid my debt to my family 1,000 times over already. It was time for them to face the consequences of their own choices. The next morning, I woke to the sight of the Alaska coastline in the distance outside my balcony. We were cruising through the Inside Passage, surrounded by snow-capped mountains and dense evergreen forests that tumbled down to the water's edge beautifully. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my entire life, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else completely. I spent the entire day on deck, bundled in layers against the crisp northern air, watching for whales and eagles, and the occasional glimpse of glacier ice floating in the water around us. Other passengers moved around me constantly, couples holding hands romantically, families with children laughing, groups of friends taking photos together. I was alone, but I didn't feel lonely at all. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That afternoon, as we approached our first port of call, I finally turned my phone back on again. The notifications had continued to pile up overnight steadily, though the rate had slowed somewhat. My family must have exhausted themselves with the initial barrage of calls and messages. The most recent voicemail was from my father, left around midnight the night before. His voice was tired and completely defeated, stripped of the anger that had characterized his earlier messages. "Holly, I don't understand why you did this to us at all. We're at a motel now for tonight. The credit card you gave us for emergencies got declined at the hotel, so we had to use our own money instead. Your mother is completely in pieces about this. Brittany is hysterical still. We thought we were coming home from vacation happily, and instead, we found strangers in our house. How could you do this to us? Please, just call us back. We need to talk about this situation together." I listened to the message twice through, analyzing every word carefully. Our house. He still called it our house, even after living there rent-free for 4 years while I paid for everything. Even now, facing the consequences of their actions, they couldn't see the truth. They couldn't understand that it had never been their house to begin with at all. I typed out a text message carefully, the first communication I had sent them since this all began. "The house belonged to me legally. You lived there for free while I paid all the bills. You stole $12,700 from me to take a vacation I wasn't invited to. You treated me like an ATM for 33 years. I'm done with all of you. Don't contact me again." I sent the message and blocked all 3 of their numbers immediately. Then I blocked their email addresses and unfriended them on all social media platforms. One by one, I severed every digital connection that had kept me tethered to their toxicity. When I was finished with everything, I felt lighter than I had in many years. The weight of their expectations, their demands, their constant disappointment in me, all of it was gone completely. I was finally free to be whoever I wanted to be, without their judgment hanging over every decision I made. The ship docked at our first port of call, a small fishing village with colorful houses climbing up the hillside beautifully. I joined a shore excursion to a glacier, hiking through pristine wilderness to stand at the base of an ancient river of ice. The guide explained how glaciers formed over time, how they moved slowly, how they eventually melted and retreated. It was a lesson in impermanence, in the way that even the most seemingly solid things could change over time. As I stood there in awe, staring up at the massive wall of blue-white ice before me, I thought about the person I used to be. The doormat, the people-pleaser, the invisible sister who gave everything and received nothing in return. That version of Holly was melting away now, retreating like the glacier before me. And in her place, something new was emerging. I didn't know yet who I would become in the future, but for the first time in my entire life, I was genuinely excited to find out. The cruise continued for another 5 days after that, each one more wonderful than the last. We visited Juneau and Ketchikan, sailed past the magnificent Hubbard Glacier, and spent one magical night watching the northern lights dance across the sky from the top deck of the ship. I talked to strangers easily, tried new foods adventurously, and did things I never would have considered before in my life. I went ziplining through a rainforest canopy. I ate king crab caught fresh that morning. I bought an expensive piece of native art to hang in whatever home I would make for myself next. And through it all, I didn't think about my family much. Not really. They existed somewhere in the back of my mind, a fading memory of a life I was leaving behind. But they didn't dominate my thoughts anymore. They didn't control my emotions. For the first time in decades, I was living entirely in the present moment, and it was absolutely glorious. On the last night of the cruise, I sat on my balcony with a glass of champagne, watching the stars emerge one by one over the darkening sea. We would arrive back in Seattle the next morning, and from there, I would need to figure out what came next for me. I had money from the house sale, enough to start over somewhere new. I could go anywhere, do anything. The possibilities were endless and terrifying and wonderful all at once. My phone sat on the table next to me, still silenced but no longer completely ignored. I had unblocked my family's numbers a few hours ago, curious to see if they were still trying to reach me. They were. The calls had continued, though less frequently now. The voicemails had grown shorter, more desperate. And the text messages had evolved from demands to pleas. "Holly, please, we really need to talk about this. I know we weren't perfect parents, but this is too much to do. Where are we supposed to live now? You can't just abandon us like this. Mom won't stop crying about it. Are you happy now with yourself?" That last one was from Brittany, and it made me laugh out loud. My sister, who had never worked a full day in her life, who had always been handed everything while I struggled for scraps, was trying to make me feel guilty about my mother's tears. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. I didn't respond to any of the messages at all. What would be the point of it? They weren't interested in understanding what they had done wrong. They just wanted me to fix the situation, to go back to being the reliable Holly who cleaned up everyone else's messes for them. And that Holly didn't exist anymore. The next morning, I disembarked from the ship and found my way to the airport. I had a few hours before my flight back to Des Moines, so I stopped at a coffee shop and pulled out my laptop. It was time to start planning the next chapter of my life. I had already decided not to return to my apartment there. The lease was up at the end of the month anyway, and there was nothing keeping me in Iowa anymore. My job at the accounting firm was fine, but I had never loved it. I had taken it because it was stable, because it allowed me to support my family, because it was the responsible choice. But I was done making responsible choices that only benefited other people. I started researching cities where I might want to live instead. Portland, Denver, Asheville, places with mountains and culture and the kind of energy that felt alive. I made lists of pros and cons, salary expectations, and cost of living calculations. By the time my flight was called, I had narrowed it down to 3 options. The flight home was long, giving me plenty of time to think about everything. I thought about my parents, stranded without the safety net they had taken for granted. I thought about Brittany, forced for the first time in her life to deal with actual consequences. I thought about all the years I had spent being invisible, being used, being taken for granted by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. And I thought about the future, my future, one where I mattered, one where my needs counted, one where I didn't have to sacrifice everything I had just to keep other people comfortable. When I landed in Des Moines, I didn't go back to my apartment. Instead, I checked into a hotel near the airport and slept for 12 hours straight. When I woke up, I felt more rested than I had in years. I spent the next week wrapping up my life in Iowa. I gave notice at my job, thanking my boss for the opportunities but explaining that I was ready for a change. I packed up my apartment, donating most of my belongings to local charities and shipping only the essentials to my new destination. I had chosen Denver, drawn by the mountains and the sunshine, and the promise of a fresh start. Throughout it all, the calls and messages from my family continued. They had found out where I was staying and showed up at the hotel once, but I had the front desk tell them I wasn't available to see them. I watched from my window as my mother paced the parking lot, her phone pressed to her ear, probably leaving yet another voicemail that I would never listen to. Part of me wanted to confront them, to explain exactly why I had done what I did, but I knew it would be pointless. They would never accept responsibility for their actions. They would never acknowledge the years of favoritism and exploitation. They would only turn everything around, make themselves the victims, and try to guilt me into fixing the situation. So I stayed silent. I let my absence speak for itself. And when the moving truck pulled away from my empty apartment, carrying everything I owned toward a new life in a new city, I didn't look back. Denver welcomed me with open arms and sunshine. I found an apartment in a neighborhood full of coffee shops and bookstores, the kind of place I had always dreamed of living but never thought I deserved. The mountains were visible from my bedroom window, snow-capped peaks that reminded me every morning that I had made the right choice. Starting over at 33 was harder than I expected, but also more rewarding. I found a new job at a financial consulting firm, where my experience and work ethic were actually appreciated. My colleagues invited me to happy hours and weekend hikes, treating me like an equal rather than an invisible workhorse. I made friends, real friends, people who liked me for who I was rather than what I could do for them. Months passed, and the calls from my family gradually slowed to a trickle. Occasionally, I would receive a message from an unknown number, and I would know it was one of them trying to get through. But I never answered, and eventually, even those attempts stopped. I learned through a distant cousin that my parents had moved in with Brittany, who had reluctantly agreed to take them in after the motel became too expensive. The arrangement was not going well. Brittany's small apartment was cramped. My parents complained constantly about the lack of space and privacy, and everyone blamed everyone else for their situation. The golden child was finally experiencing what it felt like to be responsible for our parents, and by all accounts, she was not handling it gracefully. The credit card company had completed their investigation and found in my favor. The charges had been fraudulent, made without my authorization, and my family was now responsible for repaying the debt. I had no idea how they were managing that, and honestly, I didn't care. It was no longer my problem. I started therapy during my second month in Denver, something I probably should have done years ago. My therapist helped me understand the dynamics that had shaped my family, the roles we had all been assigned, and the courage it had taken to break free. She validated my feelings in a way that no one ever had before, telling me that I wasn't selfish for wanting to be treated with respect. I was just human. The healing process was slow and sometimes painful. There were moments when I doubted myself, when the guilt crept in and whispered that I should have found a better way. But those moments became fewer and farther between as I built my new life, surrounded by people who actually valued me. One evening, about 8 months after my move, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. I opened the door to find Brittany standing there, looking older and more tired than I had ever seen her. "Holly," she said, her voice cracking. "We need to talk." I stared at her for a long moment, taking in the dark circles under her eyes and the nervous way she clutched her purse. This was not the confident, entitled sister I remembered. This was someone who had been broken down by the weight of her own choices. "How did you find me?" I asked, not moving to let her in. "I hired a private investigator. Please, Holly, just give me 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let Brittany enter my apartment. She looked around at my cozy living room, taking in the art on the walls and the plants by the window, and the evidence of a life well lived. I could see the envy flickering in her eyes, the realization that I had built something beautiful while she was drowning. "Nice place," she said quietly. "You seem like you're doing well." "I am," I replied, not offering her a seat. "What do you want, Brittany?" She took a deep breath, and I braced myself for the manipulation I knew was coming. But what she said next surprised me. "I came to apologize." I waited, saying nothing. "Not because I think it will change anything," she continued, her voice trembling. "I know you're not going to forgive me, and I don't blame you. But I needed you to know that I finally understand what we did to you. Living with Mom and Dad these past months has been a nightmare. They treat me the same way they always treated you. Nothing I do is good enough. Everything is my fault, and I realize that this is what your entire life was like." I felt something twist in my chest, a complicated mixture of vindication and sorrow. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? For my family to finally see the truth. But hearing it from Brittany's lips didn't feel as satisfying as I had imagined. "They're blaming you for everything, you know," she said. "They say you ruined their lives, that you're heartless and cruel. But the truth is, they don't want to admit what they did wrong. They never will, and I was the same way for too long." "What changed?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Living with them," Brittany laughed bitterly. "Seeing how they operate up close. They take everything and give nothing. They criticize constantly. They expect you to sacrifice your entire existence for their comfort. Sound familiar?" It did. It sounded exactly like my entire childhood, my entire adult life up until a year ago. "I'm not asking you to let me back into your life," Brittany said. "I know I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. And I'm sorry. For everything." We stood in silence for a moment, two sisters separated by years of resentment and inequality. I could see that Brittany was genuine, that something in her had genuinely shifted. But I also knew that one apology couldn't undo decades of damage. "Thank you for saying that," I finally said. "It means something, even if it doesn't change anything." Brittany nodded, tears streaming down her face. "What do I do now?" "You do what I did," I told her. "You leave. You build your own life. You stop letting them control you. But they're our parents, and they're adults who made their own choices, just like we have to make ours." She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something pass across her face. Understanding, maybe, or resignation. Then she wiped her eyes and turned toward the door. "Goodbye, Holly." "Goodbye, Brittany." I watched her walk down the hallway toward the elevator, and I felt a strange sense of closure. That night, I sat on my balcony and looked at the mountains, thinking about everything that had led me to this moment. The years of being invisible, the credit card charges that had finally broken me, the house sale that had set me free, and now Brittany's unexpected apology. I didn't know what would happen next between me and my family. Maybe nothing. Maybe Brittany would find her own strength and escape, the way I had. Or maybe she would fall back into the old patterns, too afraid to break free completely. Either way, it was no longer my responsibility to save her. In the months that followed, I heard occasional updates through the family grapevine. My parents had eventually found a small apartment they could afford, though it was nothing like the house they had lived in rent-free for so long. My father's back had gotten worse, and he was now using a cane. My mother had started working part-time at a grocery store, something she had always considered beneath her. 1 year after the cruise that had changed everything, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my mother, a long, handwritten message full of grievances and accusations and pleas for reconciliation. She blamed me for destroying the family, for being heartless, for caring more about money than about my own parents. She claimed that everything they had done was out of love, that I had misunderstood their intentions, that I owed them an apology. I read the letter once, then put it through the shredder. Some things weren't worth responding to. As for me, I continued to build the life I had always wanted. I got promoted at work, started a side business doing financial coaching for young professionals, and even adopted a cat who curled up next to me every night. I traveled to places I had always dreamed of visiting, no longer waiting for permission or feeling guilty about spending money on myself. My parents never truly recovered from the consequences of their actions. The credit card debt followed them for years, a constant reminder of the cruise that had cost them everything. Without my income to subsidize their lifestyle, they were forced to live within their means for the first time in decades. My father's health continued to decline, and my mother grew increasingly bitter and isolated as friends tired of her constant complaints about her ungrateful daughter. Brittany eventually moved across the country to escape them, though whether she ever truly broke free from the family patterns remained unclear. The comfortable retirement they had envisioned, funded entirely by my endless sacrifice, had vanished the moment I stopped playing the role they had assigned me. Standing on my balcony on the anniversary of that fateful cruise, watching the sun set behind the Rocky Mountains, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The anger had faded over time, replaced by something quieter and more peaceful. I had wanted justice, and I had gotten it. But the real victory wasn't in watching my family suffer the consequences of their actions. The real victory was standing here, in my own apartment, in my own city, living my own life on my own terms. Looking back on everything, I realized that selling the house hadn't been about revenge at all. It had been about survival, about finally choosing myself after 33 years of being taught that my needs didn't matter. The peace I felt now wasn't from watching my family struggle, but from finally closing the door on the version of myself who tolerated being treated like she was worthless.